On Berlin in late '44, the 8th Air Force brought in Mustang formations. And the Mustangs were equipped with a long-range fuel and drop tanks, about 100 gallons under each wing, which would give it an effective 7-hour range, which was tremendous. So the crews would take off. First, the bombers would depart. The crews, the fighter squadrons would take off from Duxford and other bases in England. After the formations had made their bomber streams, would then converge on them over the channel and would use their drop tanks right into Germany and would basically eject their drop tanks when they saw bogies, when they saw the enemy. And at that time, they would use all the external fuel, bang off the drop tanks, and then engage. So the Mustang, many military historians concede, based on diaries of great American and British strategists, that the air war would not have been continuable at that point. The losses in some of these raids were 30%. These were multi-hundred bomber formations. Each bomber would have approximately 10 crew members, and to lose 30% on each mission was just devastating. So they would have had to have changed tactics. So I don't think anyone would challenge the notion that because the Mustang would suddenly be able to escort these bomber formations into Berlin, it quite decisively changed the course of the war. They were able to engage Germany's finest, the Messerschmitt 109s, the Focke-Wulf 190s, and basically beat them in many instances. By that time, Germany's fighter crews were being depleted. Unlike American and British fighter crews, which I believe were rotated after a certain number of tours, they went stateside. The Germans continued to fight, and therefore, as a standard probability, their aces were gradually killed, and as the war passed on, they were replaced by novice airmen, which fell very easily to the guns of the P51s.
Mm-hmm. Most of these old Mustangs have nose art.
Yes.
This is Old Boy.
Yes.
Why was that popular? Why do the guys like to do that?
Most fighter pilots, the Mustangs were really supported by crews. I mean, they had a maintenance crew, a crew chief, and the pilot. And the crew chiefs often regarded the Mustang actually as their aircraft. They would just lend it to the fighter pilot for the duration of his mission and then would reclaim it. And amongst the crew chiefs, there were a number of very gifted amateur artists. And so many of the Mustangs, I think you pointed out that the Allied fighters didn't really have nose art. I think it was largely an American phenomenon. Glamorous Glen was Chuck Yeager's famous mount. There are many, many famous Mustangs. I plan to repaint this in time, probably to capture an authentic Mustang nose art, perhaps a reclining nude. But at the moment, it's Old Boy. It's only been Old Boy. This Mustang is actually an original 1944 Mustang, and it's only been Old Boy, I believe, for a mere 10 or 15 years, which is a very short period of time in its life.
But we'll take a closer look. Here we are at the business end of the P51 Mustang, 3 of 6 50 caliber machine guns. Tell us about the armament on this craft.
Well, as you said, the Mustang was equipped with 3 on each wing Browning 50 caliber machine guns, which were very effective. Comparatively speaking, lightly armed compared with the Messerschmitt 109 and Focke-Wulf 190, its chief adversaries, which were cannon firing. But despite that, a lethal machine in the hands of a good pilot.
What was the theory of machine guns versus cannons?
I think machine guns were simpler to construct, and cannon-firing aircraft were just coming into existence. And according to my information, the Germans stole a clear lead. I can't think of one World War II Allied fighter that was cannon-armed.
I think you're right. Yeah.
P-38, I think, had 50 calibers, and yet I can think of at least 2 German, more perhaps, Messerschmitt 110, which were cannon-armed.
And the Spitfire and the Hurricane, they were machine gun firing.
50 caliber.
Yeah.
But still, in the hands of a good pilot, these were lethal machines.
Over your head is the exhaust manifold
Yes.
of this fantastic engine, and I believe you told us that part of your relaxation is listening to Mustang noise.
For any pilot, listening to a Merlin flyby in a Mustang or a Spitfire is one of the most beautiful noises the human ear can comprehend. It's rather like angels singing. So it's the only downside of flying one is that the engine is so loud you don't get the magnificent rush that you get as a ground observer. So I will have to gladly bestow this gift upon your ears. So.
Compare this flying the Mustang to the MiG. How does it compare?
Similar. They're both heavyweights in their own regard. They're both very high-performance aircraft. They operate in a similar airspeed environment. The Mustang flies quite like a jet. It's similar weight, so it's very heavy aircraft, similar weight to the MiG. Wing area is roughly the same, so it has a very high wing loading, which means it rides turbulence beautifully. The visibility from the bubble canopy, which came out in the 51D variant and the ubiquitously known as P51 Mustang, gives just breathtaking visibility. The Focke-Wulf 190s had excellent visibility. The Messerschmitt 109s had appalling visibility. They had this little box canopy which would close with a resounding thump. I think Adolf Galland, the great fighter pilot, one of my childhood heroes with Douglas Bader, was quoted as saying that every time he flew off on a mission in a Messerschmitt 109, the awful final clunk of the canopy closing reminded him of a coffin lid. Galland was a very dashing German ace. He ended up general. He ended up with the rank of general, and it was he who commanded the first Messerschmitt 262 squadrons.
The jet squadron.
The first line of German jets. Now the Germans, everyone will concede, had extraordinary technical leap above the Allies in terms of both rocket, jet power plant and aerodynamic design. Hence the scramble, the unseemly scramble at the end of the war by the Allies, the British and the Americans against the Russians to try and capture their great scientists. Von Braun, who started the great American space
NASA.
program, NASA. So they had an extraordinary fertile engineering period for mankind. Why? God knows why. But the truth is there for anyone to see. And the first operational jet fighters were the Messerschmitt 262s. Hitler made the great mistake of interfering with Goering and Galland and the other great aces in insisting that half the 262 squadrons or half the manufactured numbers would actually be ground attack or bomber variant, when in fact Galland insisted that the only way, after the Mustangs started to escort the bombers, the only way the Germans would have a chance of defending the Reich from the marauding bomber formations was to use all these extraordinary early jets as fighter interceptors, and he was overruled, the end result being that the 262s saw combat and wrought appalling havoc in the bomber formations, were shot down by a few Mustangs and Thunderbolts, but by